Hi everyone, Tea Drinker here, and today I'm going to be reacting to Black Sails Season 3, Episode 6. I'm loving this show so far. Even before I get into the quick preamble, I just gotta say I'm loving this show. I cannot believe there's only 5 episodes left of the season. I am so hyped to see what's going to happen. I cannot believe it. So, the way this works is that I'm going to be showing you the highlight reel of my first time watching the episode. That's what the reaction is going to be. And then the review section is going to be me analysing every single scene, beginning to end, of what the show was doing upon my rewatch. And I'll have a thumbnail just to the side of my face there so you can see exactly what scene it is I'm going to be talking about. So you can scrub through the video and find the exact scene you want to hear my opinions on. And yep, I think that's all I have to say. Without further ado, let's go. That is so cool. I love African drumming so much. This place looks beautiful. Yeah, it's after getting infected.
We most certainly need them. Do you understand what I'm saying?
That's good. That's a good way of establishing the new dynamic the characters are in.
Convinced Scott, his wife.
But you haven't convinced me.
People, but not you.
There we go. What's gonna happen now? I love the music kind of slowly building tension as it goes on.
All men wanting what notorious men already have.
That's a bad Irish accent. Previous episode had a good one. That's a bad one.
Believe. It's always the little people who get hurt the worst when the market turns.
You're not going to find anyone in Ireland who sounds like that, just saying. So that's interesting. Now that gives us a little bit more insight as to why Teach is acting the way he is. Time is against him. Back from the dead. Back in Nassau. What's going on?
I was tempted. But in the
Oh,
end,
we're getting more of her.
to betray the governor in that way.
Put it in my office, please.
I'm still mad at that Irish accent a couple of scenes back. Just hire an Irish actor. It's not rocket science.
Miss Hudson.
If we can't find the cash in their possession,
Oh, great setup.
whatever happens to Nassau, you and I are likely finished.
Great setup. Well, it's a good thing Jack isn't making his way back to Nassau or anything like that, am I right? Oh, look! Look who it is. I always want to hug you, Jack. These two. He looks so different. It actually really suits him. He looks great.
It's a cravat. That's what respectable men wear. Never mind what it is.
Jack. What have
Governor would like a word with you.
What have you done? What have you done, Mr. Jack?
I believe that not even you know why. But I know why.
Great dialogue. Great character as well. I feel bad for Sylvie.
If we would all just follow his lead. Here you are again, to do the same.
The decision isn't yours. It's his.
Very interesting to see Teach challenged so directly like this.
There's only one way I know of to resolve that.
Please let it be a sing-off. I want to see a sing-off between these two.
Pistols, then swords.
No, I want both of you to sing a song, and the winner gets the fleet. It would really shake things up, I think.
I read your book.
Congratulations on all that. I know it is in your possession, and I need you to give it up. Or we're all dead.
That is quite the plot point. There's no way Teach dies. There's no way either of them die.
He should be made aware Anne will not be taken lightly.
Neither will Lieutenant Hersey.
Jack and
I
Anne.
understand Jack was arrested today.
I want to make sure I've got a good view of the moment that the world finally catches up to him.
Is that a once and for good in the era now?
Billy grasping for a sense of reason throughout all this. Suppose it was only a matter of time before we got a pistols scene in a show like Black Sails. Always reminds me of Barry Lyndon, no matter what the context. Holy shit! The way he fell, I thought he got him in the eye. Oh, very close to it. Very close to the eye. What's gonna happen? Whoa! Oh, Vane. Have you really decided that Nassau is the best way to go? Oh, Vane. I mean, we had the seed planted in the previous episode with Vane, but to see it come that quickly, I was quite surprised with. Oh, all the music. The way that's all just slow. The way that was slowly brought to a swell was really, really great. This is a great, like, physical test for Sylvie's character. Oh! Oh? Maybe? Between the two of them? Maybe. Or at the very least, her showing that level of respect for Sylvie in and of itself. That's great writing. Real vulnerability coming from Sylvie here. Oh no, Anne. Please don't let this be the capturing of Anne. I won't be able to stand it, because she's obviously going to kill him. Surely. What else is there to be done? Oh, Jack. What have you done?
I will deny him the cash, and so I will deny him the victory.
Oh, this is such good writing for Jack.
And a second pirate republic will be born from the ashes of the first. Only this time, every man who calls it home will know it came about because of me.
Yes. I mean, Boo as well, but, you know. Oh, Max is furious. That was an incredible scene. And it went further than I thought it actually would, again, with the interaction there with Anne. And Redcoat. Hey, Mr. Scott.
Us. As that. Then all is lost.
Yeah. Scott very much has the wherewithal here.
I wish you and I had not been so separate all those years.
Oh.
A better father to you.
You are such a good man. And you are a good father. You did your best.
You will be ready for it. The villain makes the story. Our common villain is.
Mm-hmm. Great transition. Oh, I'm living for those scene transitions. It just makes everything so fluid.
But your estimate will be far less optimistic.
To say the least.
The militia will help. It will keep the pressure on, and perhaps we'll get lucky.
Perhaps
If we
we'll get
don't,
lucky.
then you may have to be prepared.
Oh, Vane.
Most of it was destroyed by the time we found it, but among the remains
Were plans for Nassau.
information.
Yeah.
Something everyone else was. Can we find it before he does?
So the hunt for the gold continues. What? Oh, was that? That did not feel like 50 minutes in the slightest. Oh my god. That was so quick. Okay, well. Yeah, there you go. I guess. 306 already over. My god. Okay, well, that's the reaction, and my review will be starting now. So the very first scene we have in this episode, we get just a mini scene of a ritual going on in their local village for Mr. Scott. We see the paint applied to the top of his head. I think it's really interesting to see that kind of world building. I think there just isn't a lot of representation of African culture, particularly with this specific period of time that one would see. So seeing that these type of ancient rituals that are still so prevalent within African culture and African communities during this specific time period of history was just a really nice little bit of world building that I'm glad the show had. Following this, we saw Maddie confront Sylvie as to why it is that he wasn't in the tent to begin with, to see what's going on, about how this could create bad blood between our men and the marooners on the island, to which we see that Sylvie's leg is progressively getting worse. And it'll be interesting to see how that ties into the rest of the episode, but at the beginning I think it's, for those who hadn't seen the previously on Black Sails, where they allude to, where they directly reference Sylvie's leg as being a problem, I think that as it stands in the episode, it's a really nice addition in order to show that, you know, kind of actions have consequences, and the thing that Sylvie was going through wasn't just a one episode thing. It wasn't just there in 302 just to add a little bit more tension. It is going to be an ongoing issue that Sylvie must face. And also, as I think I mentioned before, what I might start doing is when I watch a new episode, I might skip the previously on Black Sails, because I really enjoy going into an episode not knowing exactly what plot points to suspect are going to happen. But yeah, I think it's a great inciting incident for Sylvie in this episode. Our following full scene, we see our crew now banded up with the Marooners on the same ship. It begins with a little bit of introduction. It begins with an introduction of conflict, in which one of our men is arguing with one of the Marooners over tying rope to the ship. We get that scene as a nice introduction of our normal world, as kind of like the beginning beats of our Act 1 for this particular story, for this particular episode arc, in which we see that the men have, even though they're quarrelling, insofar as at the very least Flint goes, there is an adjustment and an acceptance as to the new equilibrium that is at play. So then, as a continuation to the scene, we get two more story beats. The first of which in that Billy makes it clear to Flint that he just isn't able to trust Flint so easily. Not that there isn't absolutely any chance that we can win the war against England for Nassau, but that it is an extremely unlikely one, or at the very least an extremely dangerous one for those involved. And of course, Billy is doing what Billy does best, which is making his point of disagreement very, very clear, but of course, as always, being unable to really do a huge amount about it. But I do sense that Flint has a great deal of respect for him, given that in the following beat, where it's introduced that we are approaching the exact same island that Teach himself has now taken for himself, so to speak, Flint is very direct in saying to Billy, in a few hours' time, you could very well be proven correct. You could very well have proven that you're smarter than I am. So what I like about that interaction is that it shows that it reinforces the premise of Flint truly having a great deal of respect for Billy at this particular juncture. And again, that's us now moving into, that's the inciting incident now established for us to bring us into the Act 2 of the storyline for Flint and Billy and the men in general, which is we now need to try our best to acquiesce or convince or even possibly fight Teach at this particular juncture. So we get a great moment of exposition with Teach and a woman doing an awful Irish accent, which I already mentioned again. Gets right under my skin, similar to the shrapnel that Teach has under his skin, which we have learned is going to be the ticking clock for him. So this is a great scene of getting a bit of information to the audience that the other characters aren't aware of. And as I said in my reaction, it does add a lot of context as to why Teach is behaving the way he is and seeing things the way that he is seeing them, and why he is ultimately, I suppose, able to forgive Charles Vane for the discrepancy of the past, due to the fact that he is, again, running against a clock, that there isn't much of time left to play with or to waste on grudges, particularly seeing as he can't have a son. That Vane is going to be the kind of last hope he could have in that regard, which I suppose makes things very tragic as we see the way things end up towards the end of the episode. But that being said, we can infer that we haven't seen the last of Teach at the end of the episode, given the fact that we've been given so much backstory and so much screen time with him in not even 6 full episodes yet, that it would be ridiculous to assume that we're not going to see far more of him as an antagonist to the story. Not even an antagonist, just as a valuable player to the story. It's also worth noting that when I had no choice but to look up a viewing link online through the Lionsgate website to view this episode, and I had a poster for Black Sails that literally had Teach there in the background, so now I know that Teach is going to be here for quite some time. But I digress. That was an interesting bit of exposition that is certainly going to have a good payoff as time goes on. Or at the very least, it has given us a suitable amount of lore for Teach that allows us to have more investment in him as a character as time goes on. And then, of course, we had the scene ending with our boys washing up on the shore of the beach to greet Teach, and that was just a great little moment of Teach just looking at him being like, Jesus, at the idea of the dead man has come back to negotiate a deal. Following this, we get a short scene with Hudson, the chambermaid, who explains the story as to how it came to pass where she would end up being a spy and having to ultimately betray the governor in the way that she did, although of course she did go out of her way to warn the governor in the previous episode. And the backstory, I think, was very necessary for the character, just to, again, add to the world building and add to the context as to why these things should be believable and why these threats should be taken seriously. It adds a little bit more exposition to the degree to which the Spanish will act in order to get back what is theirs. I just gotta commend the actor playing Hudson there. Like, that actor, presumably we're not going to see a huge amount of her past this episode, but just for this scene in particular, every single expression she has, she just nailed that role, as all the actors do in this show, really. But whenever it does happen, I still have to point it out. Short moment with Hudson then leads us directly into Governor Rogers and Elle discussing the next plan of action. Just a small detail I want to talk about really quickly is the fact that when Governor talks about how he initially assumed Hudson had been spying on Rogers and looking at him once or twice in a way that made him feel uneasy, that he initially took that up as her suspecting that his relationship with Elle had been inappropriate. When he says the word inappropriate, he kind of stops halfway through, almost, because he doesn't want that to be taken... Well, of course, he doesn't want to hear it overheard is one thing, but also more so it's a case of him not wanting to describe what the two of them have as being inappropriate. It's just, that's a tiny little detail, and I'm not sure if that was as a result of the direction, if it was a result of the way it was written in the teleplay. I don't know if that was the actor's personal choice, but in any case, it's just a small tiny bit of characterization within that sentence of dialogue that I felt did a huge amount, really. It was another case of Black Sails adding in a small detail that didn't have to be there, but the fact that it does makes the storytelling a lot stronger for it. In any case, what we get here is the setup of the inciting incident for both of the characters. We get them understanding that he is very much in, as he says himself, a binary state. Either I set everything back to the way things were, I either make this right, or I fail. If I'm not able to find Jack and Anne, and as such find the cash, then I'm as good as in prison, and Elle might actually be hanged for this, or at the very least she'll face a much harder time than she would had she had originally been captured, arguably. In any case, we now understand what is going to be going on for these characters. We understand that this sets up, of course, the conflict for them as well as the conflict for Jack and Anne, and we're now going to see Jack in the following scene trying to navigate his situation to the best of his ability. The previous scene between Elle and Rogers has a nice transition into seeing Jack back at Nassau, and the first thing he notices is that there's a crew already lined up to rebuild the fort. That despite his best efforts to try to get the men to do the same thing, here you have men willingly doing it for the new English governor of Nassau, and knowing what we know about his character and how he's hurt at the idea of not having a legacy anymore, hence why he's now back in Nassau in this episode, that was a nice little detail that, again, because he says it explicitly to Featherstone in the following scene, it didn't have to be there, so the fact that it was a really nice touch. After a short little beat between Featherstone and Edel, it's always nice to see them two interact with one another. We see Jack apprehended by the English forces, but not before he makes it clear to Featherstone that he is completely confounded at what has happened here, that he spent so much money in order to try to get the men to do a certain amount of work, and whereas England were able to do that with less money and more work with the new governor. And given how much we know about Jack's character and, of course, what his succeeding arc is going to be for this particular episode, yeah, it's a noticeable shot to his ego that something like that would happen. So, nonetheless, it is interesting to see that he's still willing to put himself forward, that he's still willing to see himself carve out this legacy for himself despite all the odds in front of him. The following scene, in which Sylvie is refusing medicine and Maddie is trying to get at the center as to what it is about Sylvie that's motivating him to have this type of issue, and Sylvie really lets his guard down, and once more for this season he straight up puts his cards on the table and says, I'm afraid of looking weak in front of my men, in front of your men. I'm holding this world with both hands, and that only happens if I appear to be bulletproof. To which she is responding that there's a great kind of dual meaning there with her saying that the crown cannot be borne by someone who cannot stand, which of course we're able to assume there she means that Sylvie has to have the capacity to be able to stand up both figuratively and literally in this case. And her relating what he's going through to her own experience is a great form of connection between the two characters. So it's great to see Billy's leg very much being used as a metaphor in this show. It's being used as a symbol and a focal point of the wound that he has accepted. It's a wound that he has had inflicted upon him as a result of wanting to stand by his crew, and it is something that is going to fester and fester the more and more he tries to stand upon it. I think having that particular injury serves as a very good visual reminder. It's a visual reminder, and again, just working as a plot device, it's quite a strong encapsulation of Sylvie trying to fight against something that ultimately cannot be fought against, yet he must do it anyway as a means to an end of achieving security for both himself and the crewmen as well. So we had a really interesting scene, seeing the payoff of all we've seen thus far of Teach discussing Flint, and here they are now, just face to face having a conversation about what it is that is to be done about their fleet. We got a bit of backstory there where Teach referenced the attitude that Flint had in the past, and he even goes as far as to assert that Flint never actually knew Nassau to begin with, which was very interesting bit of dialogue that I wasn't expecting from Teach. We had Flint make it very direct that so much of this does come down ultimately to what Vane wants to do in the situation. Vane holds so much control over the crewman's respect that he could never be dismissed so easily by either Flint or Teach. But Flint brings up that they originally had this plan to take Nassau that he would see be adhered to. But of course then Vane brings up the very pertinent issue of, well, if the crew are not going to be loyal to us, if the crewmen were willing to lay down their arms in order to get just a little bit more money for them to bring my head to Hornigold on a platter, for them to just be motivated by money and haven't any notion towards oath or commitment or loyalty, then Nassau is as good as dead. So Flint is seeing something that he can do here that Teach thinks, both Teach and Vane for the moment think are long dead. So for it to then lead to the extreme measures of this will be pistols and swords, as audience members we know that something is going to go awry, that it's not going to go down the way it is because these characters are just too important to be killed as quickly as that. But nonetheless, it is a great way of illustrating just the importance of the fleet to either men, as well as the degree to which these two very rational, very reasonable captains, I don't think I would have said that about Flint 4 episodes ago, but nonetheless, how these two very reasonable men are at odds with one another for a completely valid reason. And yeah, I in general, I was really looking forward to seeing the two of them interact with one another, so seeing that payoff was very satisfying. Next, we got the scene of Jack and Governor Rogers speak with one another. It's entertaining to see a little bit of the payoff of Rogers talking about his book in the previous episode with Elle, now leading to a moment of a bit of dry comedy with Jack saying that, yeah, I read it, I kind of got the gist of it, you're born from wealth and now you're a wealthy man trying to prove himself to his parents. It's yeah, I didn't find it a page turner, but I'm glad other people did. Like, I like that because I could totally read that as Jack not even trying to be sarcastic or condescending or trying to put Rogers down. Just even were he to be responding in total earnest to to the question, it's going to be funny in and of itself. But we get right to it with Rogers saying to him, it's like, look, either you give us the money or we're all dead. It's going to be as simple as that. So course, it's not resolved. That particular beat for Jack isn't resolved now, but it's a good setup of what's going to come for the rest of the episode. There's an interesting moment that happens in which, in the precursor to the fight, we see Flint and Vane speak to one another about what is going to be the best path forward. Vane directly questioning him, like, do you even see a way of winning this fight? Not just the physical fight, but the fight at all. Do you see yourself as having a way forward with Nassau? And trying to expect this island full of people who have been so disloyal to us to even take up arms at your side against the prospect of having these indisputable pardons. And one can only assume that if we are to get to the island and Flint finds himself speaking to the crewman, he'll be making a very convincing speech, not dissimilar to the one made in 302 and the one made in the previous episode to the Queen. That he'll have some shape or form of being able to mold their minds the way he wants them to. As he even says to Vane directly that they may have succumbed to Rogers, but they can succumb to me as well. I have the capacity to lead them. They change their mind once, their minds can be changed once more. But then the scene ends with him saying that disregarding whatever promise you made to teach or to me, or anything like loyalty or money or blah 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 blah, if you leave everything else aside, it comes down to one important question, which is, who are you? And in and of itself, I think one could be forgiven for thinking that Flint is really trying to get inside Vane's head there, that he's really trying to manipulate them. And manipulate him, given that there's a little bit of venom with both of them, with the words they speak to one another. But I took it, and even outside of knowing where the episode is going to eventually end up, not just this particular location and overall sequence, but the episode in and of itself, the conversation they have, even setting that aside, I think that Flint is very much disenfranchised from the idea of manipulating people in the way he may have, given the amount of clarity that he's been given over the last 5 episodes. So for me, as an audience member, when he asks Vane directly, who are you? I take it on face value. He is truly asking him that. And again, knowing where the episode is going to go, I can speak to it when it gets to it, but I think that, again, for us as audience members at this particular juncture, Vane being asked that question directly after the last episode, where we see him really, really hesitating when Teach left the room once he'd been questioned as to whether or not he is truly committed to not attacking Nassau. We see that all these are snowballing in Vane's head, and there's only so much more Vane can take before he has to make the definitive choice as to whether or not he is or isn't going to leave behind Nassau. So there's a great continuation of the scene there between Jack and Rogers. Of all people to have speak to Jack about legacy, it is going to be a person who, within their own right, has a certain amount of celebrity, I say. You could maybe use that word for lack of a better term, within his own particular field. But the fact that this is a character who we have set up in the previous episode with Elle asking directly that he has his own tragedy, he has his own backstory and lore, and he has his own story worth listening to. And then for Jack to a particular degree, unintentionally, undermine that by talking about how it is just a story at the end of the day, that what Rogers has done is going to amount to just a story and not so much of a legacy, and to have Rogers then act as a foil to Jack's internal conflict of what it means to leave a legacy behind in order to do the right thing, I think was just really, really great writing. And at this particular point in time, as you might have heard through the reaction, whatever way I cut it up, you'll definitely hear it towards the end of the reaction when I'm talking about what's happening there with Anne. I was totally bought into the idea that Jack had succumbed to reason in this instance, that he is quietly accepting the fact that he does have to give up his legacy in order to do the right thing. So again, I just want to point it out that having this type of interaction happening between Rogers and Jack was just fantastic planning from the writer's point of view. And then, of course, just really quickly, following Jack saying that he will succumb and write the letter, having the governor give us that exposition of what it is exactly that Anne is going to have approaching towards her, and then Max questioning why it is that Jack has been arrested in the first place, is just a really nice touch of exposition just to end that. I think that had they pushed that forward, it might have come across not even a little bit confusing, but I think it would have seemed like a bit too much all at once had they done it that way to make things a bit more dramatic. Instead, they kind of brought the drama a little bit closer in the story structure, and then it'll have kind of more of a delayed payoff later on. I prefer the way that they took that approach, and also I had to include a screenshot here of Max just for what she's wearing. The production design and the costume design of this show is just second to none. Honestly, they just did such an amazing job with all this. It's like it's halfway between Pirates of the Caribbean meets Barryland, and it's perfect, just absolutely perfect. So before we go into talking about the fight in and of itself, I think it's so great the interaction we got between Ben and Billy there. The first of it being that it completely just went over my head when I started this episode and I saw that interaction between the two of them. Completely went over my head in that, oh yeah, Ben's just part of our crew now. Like, he didn't look out of place necessarily. Well, that's the whole thing. It's the fact that he didn't look out of place. I just take it on face value of, oh yeah, it makes sense in the story for Ben to be here. It's just one of those little things where because a character had been given so much significance in a previous episode, that then when they show up in the next episode, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal because, oh yeah, we've been given ample amount of screen time. Plot-wise, I'm sure there's a logical reason as to why it is that they're actually here to begin with. So just kind of noticing that detail the second time around was interesting to me. The second thing being that, yeah, we get further exposition as to what it is that's within Billy's head, which I think is a great way of adding continuation on from what happened in the previous scene with Billy talking directly to Flint, in which, you know, Flint's actions, but more so Billy's distrust of Flint's actions, had been made very explicit to us in the initial scene of this episode, and then to have that kind of reiterated and then further built upon. I mean, again, we know enough about Billy's character that it isn't something that necessarily needs to happen here. It's just extra reinforcement, extra bit of characterization for Billy that often happens with Sylvie in the same vein. It's these little scenes like that, these little interactions, to show us so focused on us knowing what it is exactly that's going inside their heads, what conflict is there, why the conflict is there, how the characters in and of themselves and then the other characters surrounding them are all responding to that conflict. That to me makes the writing as strong as it is. So then we get the fight scene between Flint and Teach. That was very engaging the whole way through. After there was a shot with the pistols, I was really thinking, wait, so do they stand up and do they just take a second shot? And then, of course, not realizing that, no, that then leads directly into the sword fight. So every day's a school day. I also thought it was entertaining. If you're watching the full episode at all this week, if you go to 33:26 on the runtime, and you see the wide shot of the two of them standing facing one another, it's a shaky cam anyway, but if you go to exactly 33:26, you'll see the camera actually full on almost kind of like falls a bit. Well, it does actually fall a bit. It falls and then is kind of repositioned. I noticed that not on the initial viewing, but on the rewatch, it immediately stood out to me because the camera's always just like a little bit in motion, and then this time it like totally jerks. Anyway, production goofs aside, we had Vane just coming out at the end of the day to save Flint's life. And yeah, well, I guess this is where Vane is now. Vane, again, as aforementioned, you had the planting of the seed, which meant that he had it in his mind that he could potentially go back and take Nassau at some point, and now here Flint arrives on his lap, so to speak, with the idea in mind. So you could then retroactively view the previous scene in which he's asking Flint, what does he think he's doing? Does he really think this is possible? You can view that as Vane almost wanting Flint to convince him that he wants an argument presented to him in order to do what's right. I think Flint, saying 3 words to him, "Who are you?" That in and of itself clearly isn't the driving force to Vane doing what he did there. What it's bred by is the insecurity that he has had for episodes now, that he has tried so hard to put at bay, but it's easy to put those feelings aside when you truly believe Flint to be dead, or at the very least for Flint to be incapacitated. Now that the key is actually in his hand, now that he actually is sitting in the position of power, which is having Flint as his partner and having Flint's resources there, it's very difficult to get over the grudge. And it's wanting to try to get over the grudge and the feelings that Vane has when the prospect of taking down Nassau and defeating the English is now more of a pipe dream, particularly with the crewmen, of course, dissipating under the guise of Hornigold giving them money. Well, not the guise, the actual guarantee that Hornigold is going to promise them money on top of the already present pardons. It's very easy for Vane to cut his losses and go down the path of acceptance when there's no longer any possibility of respite. So when the possibility of respite presents itself to Vane once more, we kind of see how strong his conviction truly was to no longer viewing Nassau as an asset to him. We then get this incredible scene between Sylvie and Maddie. First of all, you have the touching of the hands, which I joked about during the reaction itself, but all joking aside, I think it's fantastic to see a connection of these two characters who are essentially quartermasters in their own right. They're quartermasters who very well one day may be asked to hold the mantle of their respective civilizations. They're two people who can only understand each other in a way that they understand each other in a way that so many other people surrounding them simply cannot, because there's just so much at stake at all times for them that even though they're not the one in charge, they are the one maintaining order nonetheless. So there's going to be an inherent emotional connection there, which I think they've established very, very well in a way that was very satisfying to watch. So to have Sylvie directly say that so much of this relies on me having an understanding of Flint, and there's no way in which I can have this connection with Flint without going deep into his psyche. And the deeper and deeper I go, the darker and darker it gets, and of course that's going to lead to so much of the hopeless feelings that Sylvie has, that is exacerbated by everything that's happening with his leg. So it was so interesting, I did not see that coming at all. I expected Maddie to just, when I watched the episode for the first time, I was just expecting Maddie to say something along the lines of, this is your purpose, and I have this feeling too, and we're both fighting to struggle in a similar way. But then for her to actually go one step forward and say that, perhaps I could be your anchor for this. Perhaps that this journey you're fighting with Flint isn't one that you have to do alone. And seeing what could happen between the two of them in this regard is going to be incredibly satisfying. I'm kind of hoping that Maddie doesn't end up betraying Sylvie, but her discussion with her father towards the end of the episode, of course, leads one to suspect that she isn't going to be as much of an ally to Sylvie as we think and he thinks that she could be. But I'm going to hope against that pessimistic, some might even say realistic possibility that that's what could happen, because I think that the two of them, in whatever capacity, fighting side by side and helping each other in a way that only that person can do would be very, very compelling. I just finished rewatching the scene between Jack and Max. That is undoubtedly one of my favourite scenes from this entire season thus far. And of course, it's wrong. Of course, what Jack is doing is absolutely terrible, and it's going to lead to so many people unnecessarily being hurt and killed over this. There's no defending him ethically from this point on. He is, from an ethical point of view, for that decision alone, undoubtedly just one of the worst people in the show, arguably, from a moral point of view. But from a writing point of view, absolutely amazing seeing what one man's lust for power, for the power of legacy. I suppose it's more than power if what he's seeking is to succeed him long after he's dead. One could regard it as being more than power and something else entirely, but nonetheless, seeing like the slow build, and I even, of course, mentioned it in the reaction initially, thinking that Anne wasn't going to retaliate, and then when she eventually did, like the catharsis of that, and Jack putting it very simply that, you know, either Rogers will have to quietly admit defeat, or the Spanish are going to raise this place to the ground, and from the ashes we will have a pirate home in which my name is so well known. And the way that scene ends with Max looking furious at Jack for having doing that, and the corpse of the Red Coda arriving so quickly as well, it was just absolutely brilliant. And again, for Jack as a character to see that this is how committed he is to his legacy, and him having the willingness to be one step ahead. And in the previous episode, I kept talking about how stupid Jack is for doing all this. And it is stupid. I mean, like, from an emotional maturity point of view. But I don't even know if you'd call it emotional maturity. I think that we are dealing with very existential things here, because this is a life or death situation. To live as a pirate is to live life on the knife's edge. And Jack, understanding this, has kept himself alive, and one could argue that his desire to maintain legacy is all he's known. It's all that has allowed him. It's not only granted him self-preservation, it's granted him meaning. So he'll be damned if he's going to let go of this. So to see that motivation coupled with the unbelievable level of intellect and tenacity that Jack has is already enough for him to be an incredibly compelling character for me, and one that I'm just so excited to see every single scene, just for those reasons alone. But then on top of it all, to have the character to be funny, to have the character to be entertaining, and have very witty dialogue, and genuinely comedic moments like that, and the actor himself doing such an incredible job, and I'm definitely going to seek out that actor to see what else he can do. All of it combined, it's easy to understand why, only for the fact that Flint exists, Jack is, no question, my favourite character out of this entire series. A terrible person, though. Just making that clear, not defending his actual actions in and of himself. He's a complete villain in this story. I'm not denying that. So I suppose in response to me talking about how I didn't want Maddie to eventually be a foe to Sylvie's character, I guess we kind of got a response from that in Mr. Scott making it very clear that for now, Sylvie and Flint are the partners that we necessitate, but in order for social cohesion to be maintained, the people need a story to relate to, and the story requires a villain. And for now, that villain is going to be Rogers, and I have done my best to help you understand these men. But these men is not limited to people being English. These men is going to be limited. It's going to be all-encompassing of anyone who is white, or at the very least, even anyone who just is not black in our world. It's going to be such a case where we have to align ourselves with the volatility of Flint and Silver up until the point where it is safe again for us to do without them. And for us to then navigate a world in which we are doing without them is one in which they have to be villains of the story, then so be it, because for us to maintain our civilization is always going to be our priority. Every story needs its villain. And I think that, again, even though he is speaking from a place of a high degree of reasonability and logic with that sentiment, nonetheless, I think that it's not even that it's naive, it's just more so that you're then creating you are creating a path in which if you are viewing, if your story requires a villain, does that mean the person you're speaking about truly is a villain to begin with? I don't necessarily think that Scott is going to be so paranoid that it's just going to be a case of every single person who is white or in some way, shape, or form in a position of power is going to be a villain to us in the sense of they are going to attack us. or they are going to undermine us. But it's a case of we cannot take any risks. And that is what is happening there with his daughter. Like, how do we trust Flint and Sylvie? It's because it's not going to last forever. And I agree with you, they are the villains of this story. So I'd be interested to see if Maddie's mind changes past that point. I'd be also interested to see how much of my own thinking on the subject matter is going to differ from having such a, such a stringent and black and white take on what Mr. Scott is saying. But again, given everything that he's been through and given what we've learned of Mr. Scott, I think it stands to reason that he is going to view the outside world as being a villain to them, because similar to Jack, this is the worldview and the value system you need to have in order to survive. So the scene in which Max and Elle are making their ideas on the situation known to Governor Rogers, who is of the opinion that Anne Bonny must be found no matter what, and that he will do anything in his power to make sure that they secure Nassau. Well, for one thing, I think there's a lot of things that's going on there, because we are getting very clear exposition on Max's part that she is going to distance herself as much as she can from Max and Anne, because this is what she values now. Like, she will never be able to forgive Jack for this. She'll never be able to look past it, because she knows that he is going to be so detrimental to the livelihood of Nassau. We also get, of course, the commitment that Rogers is making to finding Anne Bonny and to seeing this straight, that he is terrified of losing the street. He's terrified of Spain. He's terrified of everything. So he is similar to Elle in that way. Both of them are going to be committed to the cause. And of course, Max is part of this as well. But in particular, it's going to be Eleanor and Rogers who are so committed to maintaining their hold of Nassau and to maintaining that sort of order that it's not just a case of they will do everything to secure that future. It's more so a case of they will do everything to defend the future itself. And when Anne Bonny is going to be an active threat to that, they are going to have absolutely no qualms with taking down her and taking down anybody who could thwart them in this kind of a manner. So again, similar to the ending scene with Elle and Governor in 305, this ending scene of Eleanor and Rogers in 306 is a great expositionary setup for the inciting incident in presumably what's going to happen in 307. I included it in the thumbnail here so you can see, again, just the production, like the costume design and the lighting and cinematography. And every single time I watch Black Sails, I mean to say this and I completely forget to say it, is that so often when you look at the close-up shots of the characters when they're in the dark, their pupils are huge. Like when they're shooting that, they're either properly shooting it in very dark locations in real life, or they're fixing it in post in order to maintain the accuracy of how people would actually look. In either case, it is just such stunning detail. The production, I would go as far as to say that when it comes to production and when it comes to cinematography, art design, and everything relating to the mise en scène, as well as the sound design for this show, I could not get something better. Like, this is just absolutely top-notch quality. It truly, truly is. Finally, our last scene of this episode, we get Flint and Vane having the discussion about, yes, they have the allies and they have the assets, but do they have everything they need to take Nassau? And this is where Vane makes the information known to Flint that the Spanish are well aware of the liquidation of the Urca gold in such a manner that it is going to be, I suppose you could say, unobtainable to England, and how this is really raising the stakes, and how this is going to be a case where the Spanish will have no choice but to take immediate action onto this, and how much of what's going to happen next is going to be completely dependent on England trying to secure these assets. So it's not only a case of, I suppose you could say, England being caught with their pants down, particularly with Governor Rogers in that regard. It's going to be a case of there's going to be so much of their attention diverted towards the acquisition of that money, on top of everything else that Flint had been talking about in 305 to the Queen, in that, there's going to be the administrative nightmare, there's going to be the fact that the fort has fallen in the way that it does, that there is so much actively working against Rogers at this point, And there's so many assets that our crew, with Flint and Vane and everyone, there's so much on our side of the operation that it's becoming more and more likely that we truly have a good chance of, if not necessarily making a direct deal with the Spanish, at the very least we can overcome England in Nassau. So there's a lot of stakes that have been developed, and now there's a great amount of motivation, there's a great amount of energy leading in from here to the succeeding episode, given that we even see that shot of Anne, who is looking over her shoulder now that the Redcoats are directly on their way to find her. So all in all, I think it was just, again, another great episode. I wasn't expecting there to be necessarily huge revelations that would come. I wasn't expecting that huge of a fight scene or anything like that, simply because what Flynn said in 305 was, of course, alluding that there was going to be a great deal to come. I just wasn't expecting it to be in this episode, but we still got an enormous amount of tension built up. We got a lot of the expository world building done. We got that great scene between Flint and Teach, and I'm unsure as to what's going to happen. Like, surely Teach is going to have to do something to thwart their plans as time goes on. Given that, of course, with the resources that Teach has and the character that has been built up with him, it would be ridiculous to assume otherwise. And again, just to reiterate that scene with Jack and Max, one of my favourites of the season thus far. Great reinforcement of character, if not actually arguably progression of character for Jack, in that, while he is, of course, he's a dog with a bone when it comes to his legacy, but to see, again, the reinforcement and progression of the tenacity that his character has in order to adhere to such a worldview is just terrific stuff. So I think I'm going to leave it at that for today. I want to thank you so much for watching this, and if you have watched this video all the way to the end, then I reward you with an interesting fact. So did you know that sharks are older than trees? That's right. Sharks have existed for 450 million years, and trees have only existed for 370. So there's a good 70 million years of difference between sharks and the oldest form of what we could regard as being trees. And there's your interesting fact for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.